Welcome to Proles of the Round Table.
Hello and welcome to Proles of the Round Table, where we sit down, have a few beers, and talk leftist history. Please do us a favor and subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and rate or review to help extend our reach. Before we get started, I wanted to thank our sponsor, without whom we wouldn't have these nice microphones. In fact, we need some new ones. So big thanks to our sponsor, InfoWars, who tirelessly defends us from interdimensional pedophiles.
So brave. So brave.
Antifa super soldiers, I don't know, pizza restaurants.
Yeah, Pizzagate.
Free Alex Jones.
Lizards dressed up as
from the Facebook
politicians.
blog. Yeah, all those things. So anyway.
So many lizards. You have no idea.
Today we have with us Gabe. He's going to be our, I guess we'll call him our subject matter expert.
Hello.
On what are we going to talk about today?
So the topic of discussion today will be left-wing terrorism in Europe since 1945.
Okay, cool. And what are you drinking today, Gabe?
So I'm having one of these Oscar Blue beers that you guys had. I did not bring these, but I'm glad you have them because, goddamn, this is some good beer.
Collectivized.
Yeah, we collectivized the beer today. We're all sharing.
Very cool. Ezra, what are you drinking?
Pinot Grigio from Black Box.
Bougie.
If you can see me, I'm literally like modeling it for you. Like,
If you can, in your mind's eye.
yeah.
With frozen raspberries.
With
added.
frozen raspberries, because we're classy hosts.
Except they look like dog shit. So.
Fight me, no!
I thought it was mold at first.
They're classy, it's like diffused water.
All right, and
Justin.
I'm drinking the same thing that our counter-revolutionary friend over here is drinking, which
That's
is
my Trotskyist tendencies. Come on.
We didn't even have to ask. Damn.
which is Penner by Oscar Blues.
And on 8 hop, I'm drinking a sour saison by New Belgium, which is fantastic.
Very cool. My name is Jeremy. I'll be hosting tonight, and the royal we
Yeah,
is
what are you
drinking
drinking?
Roadhouse Brewing. It's family vacation beer. I promise I'm not drunk yet, but anyway, Gabe, you want to get started on your talking points here?
Absolutely. So, in order to contextualize the post-war status of left-wing terrorism in Europe, you kind of need to go back further than that and look at the left-wing terrorist organizations that were operating in Europe before World War II started, of which there were many. And we won't spend a lot of time on it because it's not the topic, but I'm just kind of contextualizing. So, you actually had the main ones were in Russia. That's where the birth of propaganda of the deed and other such tactics were born through Narodna Voya. Lenin's little brother actually was convicted at the age of 17 for trying to kill Tsar Alexander II.
I thought it was his older brother. Is his little brother?
It was his little brother, I think. Oh no, you're right. It was his older brother at the time, but he was little at the time. So anyway, he tried to assassinate Alexander II. Ended up getting executed for trying to do so. And Lenin, at his trial, said that ours will be another way. Like, we will not engage in this, but we will find a more sustaining route towards revolution, because this obviously did not work. But he also said he would avenge him, which he inevitably did by killing the entire Tsar's, family. Thank God for that.
So, has anybody seen that video, the Lenin in a nutshell? That basically covers that exact topic where his brother gets hung and then he murders the Tsar and his family. It's fucking hilarious. One of the best videos on the internet. Yeah. Oh my god, so good. Anyway, sorry, Gabe. Go ahead.
Very good. So yeah, I was just talking about propaganda of the deed and what that meant basically in medieval Russia, basically. So the idea behind this concept was that you would assassinate some high-ranking politician like the Tsar, and that would get you a lot of attention and a lot of notice, and the population would be like, well, what's this movement that's going out and assassinating high-ranking officials? And so that was the idea behind that, and that idea went on to inspire a lot of far-left terrorist organizations in the post-war era too. Mainly anarchist ones, but to an extent Marxist ones as well, which were, by the way, the two main variations of far-left terrorism, because Marxism and anarchism compose almost all of the far left today, and the variations under those respective umbrellas. So, that's some of the background, pre-war era. But if we want to jump into the post-war era, we have a lot of organizations to go through, a lot of different movements, ideologies, modus operandi, stuff like that. So as you guys can see, I brought my super complete list of major groups, from Europe.
Very, very comprehensive. Yeah.
So comprehensive.
If you will refer to page 6.
The fact that they're bullet points means that it's very specific.
It's very official.
Very professional.
Yeah.
So
This is everything Gabe does.
All that Trotskyist bureaucracy.
I am not ever going to live any of this down.
Forever trot.
Trotting the trot.
Forever trot. I wanna be.
Stop.
Oh my god. All right, so I have 9 main organizations here, and almost all of them are in Western Europe, which is interesting because there were not that many far left terrorist organizations operating in Eastern Europe during either the Cold War era or at all since then, so the last 25, 26, 27 years. The main 2, though, are on the front page, and they are the Red Army faction, or RAF, in Germany, which operated from 1970 to 1998, and the Red Brigades in Italy, which operated from 1970 again to 1998. 1988. So between these 2, hundreds, if not thousands of people were killed and injured. They assassinated high-ranking politicians and leaders, and their goals were, ultimately the overthrow of the state. Both of them, incidentally, were Marxist-Leninist. The Red Army faction in Germany was a bit Maoist as well. They wanted to start a people's war in the countryside because there was a significant and discontent rural population that wanted to, escape the shackles of neoliberalism and the post-war Reconstruction era. But I was thinking that maybe we could just go through all these organizations and talk about how left-wing terrorism affected these different countries in the post-war era.
Sure.
And kind of just go through it systematically, and then we can talk about why they weren't effective and give some overview about it. Just to have some relative structure to the conversation.
Okay.
And of course, I know you guys
If
are
you
going
listen to our podcast, what is the structure that you speak of?
Goddamn.
Sounds authoritarian.
And then after we talk about these main ones, because most of the far left terrorist organizations in Europe operated from the late 1960s to the early 1990s. A lot of them collapsed after the Soviet Union was overthrown in 1991. And then today, and then we can move on to the existing far left terrorist organizations operating in Europe today, because today obviously they're the study of terrorism and the news coverage of terrorism is dominated almost completely by the Islamic variety, and so that leads to the question: why is there no coverage of far left terrorism if it's actually occurring at a relatively consistent rate? Grant you, not as much as it was, in the 60s, 70s,
Sure.
and 80s, but it's still around, and no one's talking about it, which is really...
Are you going to talk about the whys? Why was it during that period specifically?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Cool.
So, and going off that,
Structured conversation.
Stretching on my back.
chronological
You don't
baby.
just yeet your way to the end.
What are you talking about? I eat my way to everything.
So going off that, yeah, the two largest organizations in the 20th century were in the post-war era were the Red Army faction in Germany and the Red Brigades in Italy. And between these two, they both grew out of the 1968 student uprisings, I guess, that occurred worldwide in Tokyo, Mexico City, Berlin, Paris, a little bit in London, a lot in Berkeley in the United States. And they were born of a frustration from, or their frustration was born of anti-imperialism. Basically in the context of the Vietnam War and the Korean War, because they were seeing that 6,000 Vietnamese civilians were dying each day, and so they felt that it was a matter of existence, a matter of morality and what have you, to oppose this in any way they could. And so you had a lot of student groups that arose out of this anti-imperialist effort. And some, there are variations like anti-Zionism and anti-Americanism and stuff like that. But for the most part, they were started by students, radical students. And
Do you feel like morality is a bad platform to move off of.
Probably a lot of people, say that and the idea of justice are very bourgeois concepts, and they've been bourgeoisified. I know proletarianizes were better than bourgeois.
Modified.
But they've,
Making that a word now.
yeah, there we go. So yeah, maybe a moral compass is not the best way to approach these ideas, but what I'm saying is that the founders of these two large organizations in Italy and Germany were largely motivated by a moral desire to stop the killing of innocent people overseas,
It's the trolley problem, essentially. Like,
Exactly.
If you want to take like a moral stance on it.
yeah. It's like, do we kill a few
Life is a
IDF
meme.
soldiers, or do we let 10,000?
I interpret life in memes.
Hey.
And so the Red Army faction was probably the most notorious one. It operated for about almost 30 years or so, from the early 70s to the late 1990s. It had multiple leaders and a few generations of leaders too. So the first ones were Andreas Badar and Gudrun Insulin. That's why I have this written down, because I have such trouble with like foreign names. Anyway, those two people, they were married and they constituted the first generation of these revolutionaries. And before we get too far into like the generations, we can kind of talk about the overview. They assassinated during their tenure of 28 years 34 people, including chauffeurs and bodyguards. A lot of injuries. During this time, 27 RAF or Red Army faction members were killed. The casualties weren't extraordinary, but they're pretty high compared to the other left-wing terrorist organizations. They mainly, and this is where there's significant overlap with other leftist terrorist organizations, they all kind of did the same shit, They assassinated, they bank robbed, they kidnapped, they bombed, through various types of bombs. There's this thing called Void, or a victim-operated implosive device, which is basically a parcel bomb, something that you get in the mail, something that's very popular today among left-wing terrorists. And then there were incendiary devices, or IIDs, and then incendiary explosive devices, or IEDs, which we saw in like the Iraq War and stuff.
Improvised.
Improvised, yes, thank you.
Were those effective, like those techniques?
Well, yeah, they usually killed the target, but sometimes innocent bystanders were killed too, and then that led to a whole nother problem with these organizations, which was, what does international and domestic public opinion think about these groups,
So after killing those, I'm assuming typically it was officials, did that effectively gain them any ground within the system to work towards overthrowing it, or were they just immediately replaced by somebody else who did the exact same shit? Right? Like how long term, what was the
so it built notoriety immediately, and it got their name out there. Just like the propaganda of the deed is supposed to, they were kind of operating within that framework, but it didn't really lead to any sort of systemic change in the state or the subsequent institutions. They killed their targets. So there was a form of revolutionary justice. And again, going back to like liberty and what we were talking about earlier, justice itself has been hijacked. Morality has been hijacked by the bourgeoisie. So it's hard to really say what revolutionary justice is, what its effects are, what have you. But they usually succeeded in killing the people that they were going after. But at the same time, they often alienated large swaths of the population who before were their base, such as like left-wing, communists, socialist, non-terrorist sympathizers. But yeah, so 34 people in the period of about 28 years, so more than a person a year. The Red Army faction were still in Germany, of course. They peaked in 1977, and it led to a national crisis, basically, where people didn't really know where the next attack was going to go or who was going to be the victim of it. It was called the German Autumn, and it's kind of similar to the Years of Lead that we'll talk about next, which were in Italy. And so the German Autumn was basically when they were the most active. They carried out assassinations or kidnappings or bombings or burglaries almost every week. And this was widely spread in the news and stuff. So after that happened, in reaction to that, a lot of people were arrested. The first generation was arrested, and many of them died in prison, actually. I think several of them committed suicide. The heads of the RAF, the Red Army faction
Why?
in Germany. I think it was because their, how do I say this? Their forebears, the people who picked up the cause after they went to prison got killed or assassinated. I don't know the specifics. But they got really depressed really fucking fast because a lot of people who were carrying on the cause were being just capped left and right. So, and a lot of times they would surrender and the police would still kill them and shoot them. Just like with the Black Panthers and what have you. So, yeah, they were they were subject to like ruthless just responses by the state. But they also, while we're talking about these succeeding generations, they also operated with different leftist terrorist organizations, like the anti-fascist 1st of October Anti-Fascist Resistance Group, or GRAPO, which was Spain's main terrorist organization during this time. And so they would coordinate on different attacks and even campaigns, much like these anarchist confederations, terrorist confederations work on today. So they would carry out attacks in coordination and with the physical help of these other terrorists from other countries. So there was like a continental mobilization in this respect of far left terrorists. And
was there a method of like communication that would keep them from, I guess, being caught?
So back then, they were less subject to unscrupulous surveillance as we are today. Like anything we say right now can be intercepted by just any means. Back then, I don't really know. I'd imagine a lot of it was kept on paper and stuff, and they didn't use cell phones or they didn't even have cell phones, but regular telephones back then. I don't exactly know. I'm kind of just speculating here, but I know that they established networks prior to that, built rapport and trust with these, the affiliated organizations, and then carried out attacks with them. And that's like a kind of a major theme, is that the far left terrorist organizations of the 60s, 70s, and 80s in Europe kind of all work together in some respect. Some of them were less integrated than others. I wouldn't even say integration is a proper word, but some of them worked there or were very close to other groups and worked in tandem on coordinated attacks against embassies, military bases, police stations.
Gotcha.
Et cetera, yeah. Their goal, of course, was to overthrow West Germany. There's speculation that they were sponsored by East Germany and Czechoslovakia specifically, and some of the Eastern Bloc countries. But in subsequent memoirs that they've written, they've vehemently denied these charges, and the Soviet Union as well denied these charges that they were supporting left-wing terrorism in Western Europe. But it's interesting to look into that because, I mean, we'll get into like comparing the left wing and the right wing later on, but the West was supporting right wing terrorism during this time. Of course, yeah. So it was a lot of hypocrisy. That's that's a theme of Western imperialism.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to some of our past podcasts, not to self-promote too much within our own podcast, but like we in the episode where we're talking about the fall of the Soviet Union, like Khrushchev was basically like, I'll give you literally everything if you just start scaling back your nuclear weapons. I will, cut back my military spending. Please stop nuclear proliferation. I will, abandon our nuclear program if you do the same. And they didn't, and he did anyway. And the U.S. did not reciprocate in any way, shape, or form. The West did not, because this whole idea that the Soviet Union was, pro-war or trying to take over the world or whatever, fucking, bullshit.
Yeah. Right.
So,
and that never even left. Like, it's still here today with the Democrats and the liberals on the Democrat side. Obviously, it's about the Russian and or the Putin and Trump things, and the. We recently saw a Facebook post of like a GOP sign with like a hammer and sickle in it. So it's like there's
in Colorado. That's
right,
weird.
yeah.
God damn.
There's still like not much differentiation from the Russians and the USSR whatsoever, and people they don't even care.
Yeah. No, but the point is like the USSR was not. I mean, I'm sure they were hoping for the death of capitalism and whatever, but they were not like actively trying to destroy Western Europe.
Right, but all of that to try to fight that idea that they were war hungry or anything like that, and still they only to be seen like that to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was reading a book by Douglas Tottle about the fraud famine. What's it called? Fraud. It's about the Holodomor. But anyway, in the introduction, he states how it is imperative that the West portrays the USSR as in this famine. It was it is the thing that we hear repeated the most probably about the Soviet Union. But it was imperative that they promote this idea that they kill millions of their own people.
Right.
Because if you can believe that they will kill millions of their own people, then you can understand why it's justified to keep them within their own borders.
Right.
Because if they'll do that to their own people, what will they do to us?
right.
Yeah. Anyway,
Contextualizing all this within the framework of the Cold War is really important, because a lot of these movements, for example, in Portugal, they would align themselves explicitly either with the Soviet Union, the West, or the non-aligned movement. The one in Portugal aligned themselves with the non-aligned
Is that
movement.
like Third Way or whatever? Like
Kind of.
neither Moscow nor Washington.
Yeah. So
the Never Trump.
The never Trump.
never Trump, yeah.
Ooh.
But yeah, I mean, there were goddamn. If you flip to page 5,
God damn it!
you'll see that.
You didn't even number the pages.
I know.
Rookie
You didn't
It's
even
the last
follow
page.
MLA format,
It's the last
so
page.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There were literally,
Self-crit.
over 100 left-wing terrorist
Oh, there's, like,
organizations
graphs.
operating.
Holy shit,
Look how
Dave.
fancy this shit is. Literally made this myself. I did not steal it off the internet or anywhere.
Did you make this like just before coming here?
No,
or
I
something?
stole the shit.
Okay,
I
I was-
stole.
For those-
Expropriated this.
For those listening at home, Gabe has made a chart of ideological patterns of terrorist groups by decade. We need to put this up for people to look at, because this is highly professional.
Because, so check it out. Between the
It is
60s,
cool.
70s, and 80s, there were over 100 left-wing terrorist organizations. And you all who are listening in your car, or at work, or whatever shitty thing you're doing right now, can't hear or can't see this, but there were more than twice as many left-wing terrorist organizations as nationalist, religious, or right-wing, which are the 4 main categories of terrorism. Not
looks like
just back then, but
combined.
today as well. What was that?
It's like there were more in this. It looks like in all. Well, no, maybe not quite all, but definitely in the '60s, there were more left-wing terrorist groups than all of the nationalist, religious, and right-wing groups combined.
Yeah, so certainly in the 60s, that's true. In the 70s, there were almost twice as many left-wing groups as the next one, but not all of them combined. And then in the 80s, it kind of petered out, and right-wing terrorism was on the upsurge, as you can see.
Yeah, it looks like right-wing terrorism is
Yeah.
just a few below
Shockingly, that was
the left-wing.
the beginning of U.S. support of right-wing terrorism.
You don't say.
Yeah.
Maybe
And then
not
in
the
19
beginning of it, but the proliferation of it.
and then in the 1990s, it petered off completely, and
Dude,
they just
I don't-
disappeared. They're not even on the chart.
Yeah.
And somehow the war on terror began.
Right. Yeah.
It must be related.
But anyway,
Yeah, somehow literally the year with the absolute fewest left-wing groups, other than the 30s, which says 0, and the 1910s, which says 0, is the year that we started the war on terror, or the
isn't that interesting?
10-year that we started the war
Shocking.
on terror. Yeah.
Anyway, let's stop referring to something people can't see.
So out of all these hundreds of, there was over 100 left-wing terrorist organizations operating within this 3-decade period. Out of all of them, the Red Army faction in Germany, the one that we've been talking about, and the Red Brigades in Italy were the 2 most significant in terms of just activity, membership, and threat to state hegemony, basically. And at the end of this, we'll kind of conclude and say that none of these terrorist organizations really succeeded in overthrowing the state, which will give us
Tell me what we are going to do at the end of this podcast.
which will give us some insight as to why there are no Marxist terrorist organizations in Europe today, which is really interesting. Yeah. So anyway, moving on. Oh, real quick, actually, before we move on, the Red Army faction in 2016, there were a few members of the RAF, 3 actually, who perpetrated 2 different bank robberies and stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they were identified through DNA samples of their hair that they left behind and stuff. It wasn't too professional. That they actually were these convicts who were released, prior. These older folks who have been in prison were in prison for several decades, and so they're still carrying out attacks today. But this is seen as more criminal than terroristic. So they don't know if they're going to utilize these funds to try to foment a new campaign or something. Yeah, but it's really interesting. Yeah, but it's it's really interesting that they're still doing this. Even so many years after this has happened. And we'll see the same thing as we move on to the Red Brigades. There's little inklings that they're still alive out there, but we don't quite know. It's really hard to say because this shit is all
Tupac.
clandestine. Exactly.
Machiavelli.
That what was it? The fucking screen of it, the fake
the
version
hologram?
of hologram, yeah. Hologram Tupac.
Hologram Red Army faction.
Yeah. When can we have hologram Lenin?
Oh.
All right, so whereas the Red Army faction in Germany existed from 1970 to 1998, over a 28-year period, the Red Brigades in Italy were from 1970 to 1988. So there were 10 years. They existed for 18 years, whereas the last one we just talked about, the Red Army faction, lasted for 28 years. So they were a little bit less lived. I mean, they weren't as long-lived as the Red Army faction, but they're still around for a long time. 18 years is a long time for a terrorist organization to exist and not be, decapitated or destroyed. Yeah, exactly. So the Red Brigade was explicitly Marxist-Leninist. It was not Maoist in any way, though they did have sympathies towards what was happening in China, especially during the Cultural Revolution and stuff, and against the subsequent, don't want to get off that topic, but the leaders here were Renato Curcio, Margherita Cagol, and those two were married too as well, actually. And then Mario Moretti, who was succeeding leader of the Red Brigade in Italy after the first two people that we just mentioned were caught. If you need to find these names because you don't know how the fuck to type them, just go to Wikipedia. That shit's on there. Okay, so if you're trying to look into this, just for the record, for all you listeners out there, the Red Brigades were. These are actually, I said earlier that the Red Army faction in Germany was probably the most incredible, just like prolific organization in the history of left-wing terrorism in Europe. But the Red Brigades were really, really active. They had a number of decentralized organizations that were inspired by the acts of these initiators. And overall, they committed 14,000 acts of violence in the first decade. These are called the Years of Lead. And everyone in Italy who's, over 40 or 50 will remember these years very specifically because widely covered in the news media. It was kind of like the Vietnam War. You always had death counts and stuff, and you found out who was getting killed and what have you. And it actually posed the greatest security threat to Western Europe in the post-war era by far left militants. They assassinated 75 people. Mainly politically motivated. There were some random killings of cops where I'm guessing, a terrorist got pulled over and they were like, fuck this, so they just killed him or something.
What was this, like, if you were to break down by percentage the victims of these killings, what do you think they would be?
I don't have that.
Or just roughly, if you were to estimate.
I'm not a professional on the Red Brigades. I know more about the Red Army faction, honestly, than them. But most of them would be military, police, or some sort of state official, like judges, or even lawyer or attorneys appointed by the state to those who were under trial, who were members of the Red Brigades. So, which the RAF did as well. They would kill their own lawyers and stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
Because they'd be like, we don't want representation. They just wouldn't talk at all during the trial. They wouldn't say shit. And then they would go out and their members would kill their lawyers. So
that's wild.
Yeah, pretty wild. What were you saying?
Wait, why? Why would you?
Because they didn't want representation, and I think they had warned them beforehand that, like, if you continue to misrepresent us, I think they felt misrepresented by the state.
Kind of like it sounds like they operated much like the
entrapment.
mafias, or
Yeah, well, in a way, and a lot of the public eventually came to see these organizations as mafia type organizations because the political dynamics of their work were undermined by the criminality that was brought up by the media, so they were seen as criminal organizations rather than terrorist organizations or, communist heroes of the people.
Right.
And
as we see even now.
Oh, for sure.
Especially in like things like G20,
Yeah, in Germany, yeah, and where was that again?
It was
the fuck? It starts with a B or G or something.
Was it Hamburg? Or...
Hamburg, yeah.
Was it Hamburg?
Yeah, last year the G20 summit, where 20,000 Antifa failed to seize anything.
They had the big conference of the
G20 summit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like in Poland,
Hamburg,
in Poland last year, the Independence Day was like the greatest meeting of the far right in Europe in recent history. Hamburg in Germany during the G20 summit was the greatest meeting of the far left in Europe in recent history. So, and it really displays the polarization. But we'll get into that.
Yeah, okay.
But anyway, the modus operandi of this group, their methods of operation were, again, assassinations, bank robberies, kidnappings, extortion, things like that, so that they could raise funds while at the same time eliminating their enemies through just violent tactics. But their goals were to create a revolutionary state through armed struggle and remove Italy from NATO, because, during this time, the the 70s, 80s, and 90s, almost all of Western Europe was entrapped within the NATO complex. And most of these groups, actually, that we'll talk about, including the RAF, which I didn't mention, wanted their countries to break free from NATO. They wanted the U.S. military to get the fuck out of their country, just like South Korea does today. They wanted, they wanted independence, autonomy from any sort of supranational military organization, and they obviously went to extremes to try to accomplish this. So they again grew out of the 1968 student riots, just like the RAF in Germany did. There was a few publications that really inspired them.
Real quick, what were the student riots about?
So they were mainly in opposition to U.S. and just Western imperialism generally. Excuse me. They were focused on the Vietnam War primarily, and also the lack of democracy that they were seeing in the post-war Reconstruction era. After 13 years of liberal, centrist hegemony, they were seeing that cost of living was increasing, and they had all these very material, immediate needs that they wanted answered, and the politicians weren't answering them. And so, a spontaneous demonstration occurred in Paris in May of 1968 that led to the complete halting of the French economy. It was so close to being a revolution, but they didn't have the organizational structure in place to, make that revolution happen, basically. It was so fucking close. And then from there, it spread all over the world, to Tokyo, to Mexico City, to Berkeley, like I said earlier, Germany. Not in the UK, interestingly enough. The English kind of abstained from this, but the 1968 student protest, there are books written about it. Highly recommend looking into it. Look at why that revolution to be failed, and why it just evolved into this new left kind of identitarian bullshit that just did not, realize a revolution, did not arm the workers, and did not seize controls of the means of production. But
there was a massive, Maoist movement in France during that time period, huge, just enormous. I should read more about this because I have no idea what happened at that point, but it fell apart.
No, there were a lot of Maoists there for sure. But a lot of these terrorist organizations, they grew out of a collective frustration that the cadre of the student-led organizations that kind of fomented the May 1968 rallies and near overthrow of Western society, they kind of grew out of that movement after they saw that their members were retreating back into everyday life, and that they weren't going to carry on the cause because they weren't tenacious enough or committed enough. And so they developed these highly concentrated cadre groups of terrorists who would carry on the struggle even in peacetime. And so that's how most of these, that's a good background question. So all the leaders of the Red Brigades in Italy were arrested in 1974 because this monk turned into a state infiltrator, basically, and he basically got all the names, addresses, and information about all the group or all the main organizers of the Red Brigades, and then turned them into the pigs without remorse. And so that kind of led to the decapitation of this group in 1974. But then the commandos of the Red Brigades, of which there were hundreds, broke them out of prison, actually, out of federal Italian prisons. Yeah, they were fronting pretty hard, and so.
Fronting back.
But the thing is, they ended up getting
Were they
arrested.
fronting though? 'Cause fronting implies
A united
not
front.
real.
No, I'm just kidding.
It's a redefinition of fronting.
So
They fronted. They red fronted.
yeah, there you go, the Red Front. So while they got broken out of prison, they ended up getting arrested again. They were careless, I think. I don't know the exact circumstances,
For the sake
but
of the argument, we'll call it global revolution.
Global revolution.
so in 1975 they published a manifesto, and there a lot of these organizations, they published literary works. Some of them emulated off, say, the Communist Manifesto and what have you. Worth looking into just to kind of get a grasp of their ideological subscriptions and what have you. In 1980, though, after the years of lead were officially over, basically, in Italy, after, thousands of acts of left-wing terrorism were committed every year in every part of Italy by multiple, independent organizations that were emulating one another without the internet, by the way, which is really interesting. In 1980, the Italian state arrested over 12,000 far-left militants. 600 of them fled to South America and France. Those were the two main places. And many of them were tried and never convicted. But it was kind of a warning, I think, to the far left that, look, you're not going to continue this, otherwise we will destroy your lives, blah, blah, blah.
Like J20 kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so yeah, that's a really good comparison because they were let off the leash, but
Yeah.
they were kind of like our trial too. Actually, if you think about it, because a lot of us were intimidated with like long sentences and money.
Right.
The people who were on trial, but then they were let off with a slap on the
For
wrist.
those
What
not
trial?
familiar, there were 6 of our local group, the Colorado Springs Socialists,
Trial of the Socialist Six.
who were arrested in March of 2017 over some stupid bullshit. But it was basically just to intimidate us, and it's clear
Yeah.
from the audio recordings that the police made on their body cams that it was all a matter of we want to get their names, we want to know who they are, and then we want to scare them into like submission.
Yeah.
Yeah, they said in the body cam footage they said they were going to pepper spray us, but because they had 2 of their informants in the
In our group.
crowd, then they decided against that. But
And
they wanted to pepper spray us, even though like it was entirely
it was a peaceful
nonviolent.
protest.
And the fact that there were children within the crowd meant nothing
Yes,
to them.
yeah,
They
no.
did not give
It
a
didn't
fuck.
matter that there were kids. It was only that their own people didn't want to get like their eyes hurt.
So if you
eyes.
want to check that out more, it's on coloradosprings.socialist.org. So look that up, and we actually have a compilation of articles up there that we recently uploaded that kind of explains our whole situation. And it wasn't just that they sent informants, but they actually collected like over 100 pages of information about the people who were the defendants in this
Right.
trial of our organization. They followed them to their places of work. They took pictures of them at their places of work. And, we warned about this a year and a half ago, that under the far-right Trump administration, the far left would be cracked down upon much further. And so this is exactly what we've seen here in the 6th most conservative city in America, which is probably one of the most conservative cities or countries in the world. So, this is what we're dealing with in Colorado Springs. So send us some solidarity farewells or something, because I don't know how long we'll last under this.
Prayers and
So
hopes.
thoughts and prayers.
Some
Prayers
thoughts and
and likes on
And
Facebook.
likes. For every one like, we get like 1 solidarity.
1 like equals 1 solidarity.
I read somewhere that that solidarity is the left-wing version of thoughts and prayers.
I like that.
Oh,
I hate
that's-
that, but I like
okay,
it.
no, that's
Hate.
no.
I feel personally attacked.
I
But
feel
Yeah.
personally attacked.
Just a little attack.
Ouch.
So, despite the fact that 12,000 far-left militants were cracked down upon in Italy in 1980, the group lasted until 1988. And between 1980 and 1988, there were a number of, dramas that occurred in Italy regarding the Red Brigades during this time. And one of the most notorious was the conviction of Antonio Negri, or Antony Negri, I can't remember how to pronounce his name,
I
but
think it is.
he was a world-renowned Marxist philosopher who was teaching political science, not only in Italy, but in Paris as well, at some of the, at some of these like high-level university places. He had written many books. He's written a book called Empire. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend checking it out. And he's a great Marxist philosopher. He not only is kind of a armchair, bookish revolutionary, but he's gone out there and done real organizing with real revolutionaries. Anyway, he was implicated in this falsely. He was exonerated after a year. And released after international outcry and all these petitions that Noam Chomsky and all these other people signed on to were like, look, this is bullshit. This guy is not responsible for this kidnapping, which was what it focused around. And eventually he was released. But he is a far-left Marxist intellectual, and he's not just one of those people who sits on the couch and writes all day and reads all day. He goes out and does real shit. So
Real shit.
yeah, if you want to look into Antony
he doesn't Google
Negri.
other people's graphs and put them on his
Yeah,
report.
exactly. God damn.
Damn,
I'm just
so
gonna
good.
can't wait to go smoke a cigarette.
Reading in an armchair. I sleep.
But the thing that he was actually implicated on,
Real
and
organizing.
and
Real shit.
for real. So
All names,
this
all the
was
time.
one of the largest attacks that Red Brigade ever did in their entire 18-year tenure. Was they kidnapped and eventually assassinated this guy who was the prime minister at one time of Italy, the head of the Christian Democratic Party, I believe. In 1978, the Red Brigades kidnapped former Prime Minister Aldo Moro. In the process, they killed 5 of his police escorts. And then 2 months later killed Moro himself after they realized they were not going to get any concessions from the states. And the demands at the time were basically that you release all of our Red Brigade comrades and you give us a few $100,000 so we can continue our terrorist campaign. They didn't acquiesce to this demand, unfortunately.
Shocking.
But they, this guy, Anto Moro, what the fuck, how do you pronounce his name?
Aldo?
Yeah, the prime minister It's on page 4 at the top in bullet point number 3. I'm just kidding. Aldo Moro, yeah. So he sent out a bunch of letters to the Pope, even pleading that they negotiate, the release of him for, the release of their comrades and some money. Never happened. They ended up telling him to put a blanket over himself because they were going to drive him somewhere, and instead they shot him 11 times in the chest with a 45 Magnum.
Damn.
Yeah, so they were not fucking around. After that, there was a huge outcry because this guy was actually trying to create a compromise between the Communist Party of Italy and various other right and centrist factions of the Italian parliament. And so, the Red Brigades didn't want this to happen, and so they kidnapped this guy. And this was one of the most high-level assassinations in all of left-wing terrorist history in the post-war era. So that was their main attack. But anyway, 14,000 people or 12,000 far-left militants got arrested. They killed dozens of people during these years, probably many more that we don't know about that aren't on official records. And they never succeeded in overthrowing the state. They never officially announced their dissolution, but in 2007, again, just like with the RAF in Germany, the Red Army faction in Germany, the Red Brigades in Italy, committed 2 bank robberies. 2 of their commandos did.
In 2007?
Yeah, in 2007. After a decade and a half of inactivity, they committed a few bank robberies, just like the Red Army faction in Germany. And so there's speculation that these networks of released prisoners who have never changed. They still want to overthrow the state with total vehemence. And retribution. We think that they're still out there and they're still coordinating among themselves, but they're very reticent to engage with the new leftist revolutionaries like ourselves and other people who want to overthrow the state. And so they're probably very isolated. And so instead of the state seeing this as, say, a terrorist act, they see it as a criminal act. It's just some petty bank robbers, But the fact that these are former members of these very notorious organizations, I think means something and probably alludes to the, reignition of the far left in Europe today.
Do you think they would buy us another microphone?
Maybe we should name them as a sponsor.
Yeah, right. Red Brigades and RAF sponsored this whole podcast. But all right, so moving on. We got a few more organizations to get through. I mean, the main ones I want to get through are Grappa, which is the next one, and Revolutionary Organization 17th November, or 17N. A lot of these groups' names are disgustingly long and complex, and so you have to just refer to them as the acronym. But these are the 2 other main organizations. If I had to say that the Italian and German terrorist organizations that we just talked about were the main 2, these are the 3rd and 4th for sure. So the 3rd and 4th are the 1st of October Anti-Fascist Resistance Group, or Grappo, which was located in Spain and operated between 1975 and 2007, so 32 years. And the 4th one is the Revolutionary Organization 17 November, or 17N, in Greece, which operated between, again, 1975 and 2002. So 22 years. So both of these lasted for more than 2 decades. And of all the organizations that we're talking about, the Revolutionary Organization 17 November, 17N, as I'll refer to them from now on, they were the most complex. They were very sophisticated. They didn't just go after police and military. They went after CIA the heads of the CIA. And actually I have some interesting anecdotes. I got to conduct a phone conversation with one of the targets of this assassination a few years ago. So I'll talk about that once we get to him. But for now, the Grappo in Spain, we'll go over some of their basic features, and then and you'll see as we're talking about all these groups, you'll find some parallels. They'll jump up for you listeners out there. They were Marxist-Leninists. They were founded during their first attack, which killed 4 cops on October 1st, 1975. Their leader was Manuel Perez Arenas. Over the tenure of their 32-year-long campaign, they killed 84 people, including cops, judges, military officials, and civilians. The civilians, incidentally, were almost entirely by accident in all of these cases that we're talking about. There were very few far-left organizations that actually did not really care whether or not they killed civilians. It's an exception, not a norm, in all of this. So, their main methods of operation or modus operandi, again, were bombings, shootings, bank robberies, kidnappings, and extortion. That's the most consistent feature of all of these organizations, is they all engage in the same type of activity in an effort to foment a revolution through inspiring the legions of working class people to rise up, pick up their weapons, and overthrow the state. So their goals were to found a Red Army and then a Spanish Republican state, while expelling NATO simultaneously. So they're anti-NATO, just like all these other groups, But,
Shocking.
Yeah, right. But they wanted to create their own army. That never really came about, obviously. The way they dissolved was that they lost popular support, which is actually the most common way that far-left terrorist organizations in the post-war era failed, was that they got their energy from the people, whether or not it was I don't know, direct or indirect, but they receive their energy by their popular support, by people writing letters of solidarity and what have you, and posting them online or in newspapers and what have you. But the main way that these organizations failed was because of the population turned against them. They were seen as petty criminals because of the way that the media distorted them, or because of their own failings in accidentally killing, say, children and civilians and stuff like that.
Which is interesting because, at least my understanding of the same far left groups in the United States at the time were destroyed through infighting and infiltration. Less than popular support, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, there are other organizations, like this Irish Revolutionary Socialist one that was destroyed through infighting. And then, what was that? You said infighting and infiltration, right?
Yeah, because of like COINTELPRO and all that stuff where they like
For
legitimately sent the FBI and in order to like drive a wedge basically between the leadership in order to divide
Absolutely.
them.
Yeah, like
and
the Black Panthers and the what was
Yeah,
Zulu
Young
Nation?
Lords.
the African nationalists.
Yeah, there was like
There was the Zulu Nation, the Young
Yeah.
Lords, and the Black Panthers. Those were like the three.
Yeah, the
that I
Zulu
know.
Nation
Well, and
was
the
like
underground
an
Weathermen,
offshoot,
too.
I think.
Oh, right.
Oh, there's so much.
There's so many. I know.
So much.
That's why I have the shit written down. The shit's
Anyway,
hard to keep track of.
If you refer to page 3,
Bullet point.
paragraph
Six.
3,
Bullet
subsection 2,
Thank you, Kermit.
bullet
Thank
point
you, Jordan
16.
Peterson.
Oh, I wish Peterson
God.
was here. We could just shit on him. God damn. All right. So, while the main reason that most of these organizations dissolve is because of the loss of popular support, there were other factors that sometimes were there as well, or they were just the main reasons these groups dissolved. So infiltration was a big one. Like I talked about, and I think the Red Brigades, there was that monk who infiltrated the Red Brigades and then sold them out to the police, and that's how the first generation was decapitated by the state.
Sure.
And decapitation, again, is a counterterrorism method that basically says that you're going to arrest like the leaders, the cadre, not just the main leader, but the cadre as well. All 5, 6, 20 of them. You're going to get them all at once, and then it's fucking over. And that's decapitation. So infiltration is a big thing. And then what was the other one that you mentioned, Justin?
Infighting.
Infighting, yeah. So that's how the Irish Revolutionary Socialists, who were part of the IRF or IRA, yeah. They were like a breakoff branch of that.
There's like Sinn Féin is like the political wing, and then the IRA was the extra.
And they had like 1,200 militant members. They were by far the largest like anti-Britain, nationalist organization in Ireland. But anyway, to wrap up the Grappo, because this is, like I said, the third main far-left terrorist organization in Europe that's operated in the post-war era. Their last attack, just like the previous two that we talked about, was in 2006, actually. So these groups, it's weird. After the fall of the Soviet Union, they all kind of went dormant for about 15 years. And in the last 10 years, they've all kind of sprung up again in their own ways through bank robberies and kidnappings and bombings and stuff. But the thing is, it's not a coherent organization. They don't have dozens, if not hundreds of people working in tandem to accomplish their goals. It's like 2 or 3 or 4, the salt of the earth, who are working together to do what they can. And again, this is considered a criminal act, not a terrorist act. And then a year after their last attack, the Grappo in Spain, their last attack, a year after that in 2007, 6 of them were captured. And
Was
we
it
think
related to the 2006 attack, or just?
I think so. I can't remember, but I believe so. But regardless, their last 6 members basically were captured in 2007. It's still listed as a terrorist organization under the European Parliament system, but they're inactive, but they haven't declared the dissolution, so we don't really know what the fuck the state of it is. They haven't done shit in 10 years, so they're probably fucked, but we don't know. So, but anyway, those are the first 3 main ones, and we'll just, I'll go over them real quick. Red Army Faction, RAF, in Germany, 1970 to 1998. Red Brigades, or the BR, in Italy, 1970 to 1988. And then the 1st of October Anti-Fascist Resistance Group, or GRAPO, much more easily pronounced, and Spain, 1975 to 2007. So those are like 3 of the 4 main ones. The 4th main one, and this is the one that I know the most about and the one that I'm most excited to talk about, is the Revolutionary Organization 17th November, or 17N, Marxist terrorist organization that operated in Greece from 1975 to 2002.
This is like some 150cc shit right now.
Yeah, so you want a 150cc stat? Listen to this. A CIA attaché, or how do you say it?
Attaché.
Yeah, I guess that's the right word. He was traveling in the heart of Athens on a sunlit summer day, driving in his car to the U.S. Embassy, and he was the head of the counterterrorism efforts in Greece during this time. He was stuck in traffic and moving at a snail's pace, and 2 men pulled up on a powerful enduro motorcycle and filled him with 7 bullets of lead of a .45 caliber pistol, blowing his chest and his face off, and he was still alive after this happened. He was screaming for help from other passengers and died a few minutes later from blood loss and blunt trauma. This was not the target of 17N, but this was the last target of 17N. So, they mistaken this guy for another guy, John Kiriakou, who some of you may have heard. He's been on Democracy Now! And stuff. He's the CIA official who defected and actually revealed that waterboarding was going on, that we were torturing people in the Middle East and stuff. He was the second in charge of counterterrorism efforts, not just in Western Europe, but in all of the Middle East as well. The CIA, if you look at the intelligence networks, they break the world into 6 different categories, and the Mediterranean countries, along with the Middle East, are kind of broken into the same category. There's a lot of overlap at the very least. And so John Kiriakou, he knew this guy, Stephen Saunders, the one who got shot 6 times with a Magnum pistol, and he said that he was actually the target of that assassination attempt. And this was in 2002, during the summer in Greece, in Athens. And so I had the opportunity, this guy basically went to prison for 2 years, John Kiriakou, this ex-CIA head. He went to prison for 2 years because he revealed secrets that undermine national security, allegedly. I think that's bullshit. And he went to 2 years while his 4 children grew up, without him. And the month that he got out of prison, I contacted him via email, and then we set up a phone call and I interviewed him. And he told me about, this guy Saunders, and his time in Greece and his time combating this organization, 17N. And it was really interesting to hear how he conveyed it and some of the sympathies that he had grown to, accept in evaluating this organization in light of his own persecution through the CIA. And so anyway, he was the target of the assassination, obviously got off, blah, blah, blah. This is the last terrorist attack that the 17N or the Revolutionary November 17th organization in Greece would ever commit. A few months later, one of their main cadre organizers, the bomb technician, he created a bomb, and something went wrong. I think he tripped or something on a sidewalk. Something very simple happened, and it caused the bomb to go off in his hands. And so it blew off his hands, and it destroyed his face, and he was rushed to the hospital, where he then ratted out everyone in 17N. And so the Greek security forces, in tandem with the CIA, who has a lot of, the U.S. military has a lot of military bases there, basically did the sting operation where they, let's see here, they found the 16 remaining members of 17N and arrested them all immediately. They found a ton of paperwork and documentary records of their activity over the last 23 years. This group, by the way, the reason the CIA was so interested in this group is because they committed 103 attacks, killing 23 people over the course of 27 years. And the reason this group stands alone not just in my mind, but in the mind of like terrorist experts and stuff out there, is that 17N were responsible for the highest level assassinations in modern world history. Not only did they take out CIA and Navy officials, but they took out the head of the security forces in Greece, the head of corporations in Greece. Like, it's like assassinating the Koch brothers today. This is the people they were going after, and going after just the highest level, most protected people you can imagine. I mean, their first attack, for God's sake, was the head of the CIA in Greece, the CIA branch in Greece, and they killed him in front of his chauffeur and his wife, and then they just drove off. They claimed responsibility, and because it was such a high-level attack, the CIA actually didn't believe that 17 and this new far-left Marxist terrorist organization was responsible for the attack. And so what they did is they went and killed another CIA guy a year later, and then left a communique that said, look, we're the ones who did this and are going to publish this, so otherwise we're going to kill more of your people. And so the CIA actually acquiesced, which is really interesting, and they published this communique, which is basically a statement of demands that you leave at the scene of a crime after you kill or bomb or something, you know. And they published it in the local Greek newspaper in Athens. You know, their goals were to rid Greece of U.S. military bases, to rid Cyprus of Turkish military bases, to break free of NATO, and to overthrow the Greek state generally. You know, I talked about the sophistication of this group. They utilized really advanced, like, logistical and technological means to accomplish their goals. They not only targeted, you know, people in the CIA and the FBI and, you know, the internal security services of Greece, but they went to the headquarters of these security services, like the CIA headquarters and stuff, and they bombed them and they launched RPGs at them, and they still got away somehow. And there was like international, I mean, from the security scene in America and the rest of the West, there was like outcry, like how could the Greeks be so incompetent? You know, like these guys they're literally bombing your fucking headquarters and killing like dozens of high-ranking officials. Like, how have you not caught these people yet? This is insane. And basically they were outmaneuvering them every time. It was later found out once they were decapitated that a lot of these people lived very mundane lifestyles. Like, one was a telephone
Switchboard operator.
Switchboard operator. Yeah, as I said on there, another one was like a bread baker. But a few of them were professors and ex-military and bomb technicians who really knew what the fuck they were doing. And so we think that that's the reason they were able to evade you know, conviction for so long. But it's honestly the most sophisticated terrorist organization of the post-war era. And the fact that Syriza, when they acceded to power in 2015 in Greece, the supposedly far left, the coalition of the far left, the fact that they didn't free all of these 17N members immediately says a lot about whether or not they were really a Marxist party. Because if it was Lenin and the Bolsheviks who acceded to power, these guys would have been out of jail like that.
Sure.
You know, but that didn't happen with Syriza. And
I noticed that they didn't also go after Golden Dawn and
no,
destroy them the way that.
So Golden Dawn wasn't as prominent as it is today back then.
No, that's what I'm saying though.
Yeah.
Like when Syriza
In 2015.
seized power, like,
Yeah, they should have arrested
did
all
not,
of them,
Like,
yeah.
destroy their entire organization the way that the right destroys the left when they seize power.
Well, Syriza's making the same mistakes that Chavez's government made in Venezuela, which was not to consolidate political power, but to allow this
Didn't go far enough.
Somewhere
Yeah,
in the middle,
exactly.
like, compromise garbage.
And when he did go far enough, when Chavez went far enough, or the furthest he ever went, you know, that's when he accomplished most of his goals, you know. And so it's kind of pathetic. And I really abhor the Syriza government for keeping these people in jail, one, and two, refusing to crack down on, like, what is literally one of the largest Nazi parties in Western Europe today.
Right, yeah. The Golden Dawn is huge, and in case anybody listening doesn't know, which I feel like most of you probably do, they're basically a like fascist. I mean, they're Greek nationalist but right wing, and
Yeah.
they beat up immigrants in the streets and
They celebrate Hitler's birthday and shit. They're straight up fascists.
They are, of course. They pretend like they aren't, but they absolutely are. But Syriza also sort of ran on this like, oh, we're going to fuck these German banks and we're not going to pay back these debts. The interest rates are untenable. We can't pay them back. And then as soon as they seized power, they were like, we're going to negotiate with the German banks, and you know what? Actually, we're going to pay back everything that we owe. And
like Yanis Varoufakis, the Greek finance minister, he actually set up a way to return to the drachma, which was the original currency of Greece. Yeah. And what's the leader of Syriza's name? That fucking he acquiesced to the Troika, which is the IMF, the World Bank, and the EU, and said, we'll pay back these debts and then some. Basically, I'll continue to let my people suffer, even though I ran on a campaign that said this is the opposite of what I'm going to do. And then at which point, Yanis Varoufakis, who I still maintain is a principled Marxist, he resigned because he had set up an entire alternative system to get the Greek currency off of the euro and all these other things, and completely basically become the first rogue state in the post-war history of Western Europe. And the leaders of Syriza were just like, no, we have to follow our orders. We have to take the whip and get bent over a barrel, and we're going to do whatever they say. And Varoufakis resigned, and now he's teaching in Texas again. So anyway, a lot of the Marxists actually that we just mentioned, especially Yanis Varoufakis, they were inspired by 17N. I have another friend on Facebook who's a professor of pedagogy, one of the leading pedagogical theorists in the world. She critically supported this organization during their tenure, and she's devastated about how things have turned out in Greece since then.
Wait, who is she part of?
She's not, I don't know if she's part of any organization. I've talked to her on Facebook and motivated her to get involved, but like so many other leading Marxist intellectuals, they just abstain from organizing. They don't.
Okay,
they
but
don't
where she reside in?
Oh, in Athens.
Okay.
Or Thessalonica.
Thessalonica.
Yikes. Okay.
Thessaloniki.
In the immortal
We
words.
should put that an add-in into your notes where it's how to pronounce
Let's
this,
correctly
especially when you're
pronounce the
drunk.
things they gave.
Yeah.
So anyway, these people assassinated, whereas other leftist terrorist organizations, I want to reiterate this because this is actually important, whereas other leftist terrorist organizations were assassinating random military personnel and big corporate bosses and, policemen and stuff, these guys were assassinating Navy generals and CIA officials and the heads of the riot police. And not just the heads of the riot police, but there were 2 or 3 incidences in the 1990s and early 2000s where N17N actually launched RPGs at buses filled with riot police on their way to contain a riot, and not only killed the head, because the guy who was the head of it was driving the bus, so they'd always launch it right at that dude's face and just to blow him up. But the other 17 riot police were critically injured and could not return to work ever, and they did that on multiple occasions and were never caught for it, which is the most incredible thing about it, because if there's a riot going on and you're under police state type law, almost martial law, and you can launch an RPG at a fucking tank full of militant fascists who are protecting the state and get away with it, that's something I respect. I don't give a fuck what you say. That is incredible that they were not caught. For the record, if we ever try to travel to other countries, they could pull up this footage and deny us entry to the countries because of it.
Previously, it'd be material
good thing you
conditions
got
in which
that,
you don't
got that
have
pseudonym.
civilian.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, you have internet to directly connect those groups to whatever. Yeah.
Damn, I should use a pseudonym too, though. In light of all this, 'cause if you
I
go on,
highly
But
respect these people who fired RPGs.
Gabe's on
It's
20
too
different
late,
watch
yeah.
lists.
You're too late.
They already know you're at our house right now.
oh my
Yeah.
god, I'm sorry for being here.
There's a drone with rockets on it currently.
We're moving
circling.
anyway.
All IDF ready and shit.
All you have to do is say JK, and it's all gone. Yeah.
Yeah, then they fly off.
The FBI has to
It's
take
just
they have to
getting-
go.
Wow, 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 wow.
Oh my god.
Are you an FBI drone? You have to tell me if you're an FBI drone.
So anyway, to wrap up 17, because we've been spending we've spent a lot of time on these first 4 organizations, but they're very important. These are the 4 main ones. All right, there's another dozen or so. I didn't write them all down here. We don't have notes on them, but in between 1945 and today, there have been about 16 organizations, almost all of which, by the way, have been Marxists, not anarchists, that were highly sophisticated, killed the most state officials,
Key caveat.
had the greatest
It is hard to
organizational
say that.
capacities, and just basically made the greatest difference in their society without actually overthrowing the state. And they're almost all dissolved now. The way that 17N dissolved again is, there was a faulty bomb operation, went off in the guy's hands. He ratted out everyone. They raided all these headquarters, and then using the information they found in the headquarters, they were able to find where the other hiding spaces were, and they found out how sophisticated 17N was and how they were importing weapons from the Middle East and even Russia and stuff, and paying for it with the $3.5 million that they stole over their
shit.
lifetime. Yeah, they stole a shitload of money. They were really good at bank robberies.
$3.5 million, modern.
No,
money, or, with-
that's inflated adjusted, yeah,
Okay.
or inflation adjusted, yeah. So that's modern money. real terms
Still,
or whatever they
like,
call it in
that's-
economics.
That's no small feat at
That's
all.
not, no. Yeah, that's enough to sustain a group of 20 militants for 10 years or 20 years, because they lived very austere lives. Something else I've found in studying far-left terrorism is that all these terrorists, they lived very austerely. They smoked cigarettes, almost all of them, because they were under a lot of stress, I imagine. and they drank, when they wanted to. But they did not live lavishly, They bought shitty cars. They lived in shitty houses where the heating and the cooling systems are fucked up, and the water was inconsistent. They were subject to slumlords, which is sometimes killed, awesome, and all these other things. But they were not living extravagantly. And in fact, 17N was one of the few organizations to keep detailed records of their expenditures, so that they knew that if they ever got caught, these expenditure, or not proposals, but these lists of shit that they've spent money on would be meticulously recorded, and it would show the public and the population, especially of Greece and these other countries, that these far left terrorists were not spending their money on steaks and champagne,
Sure.
but on weapons and paper and ink and all these things that they needed to propagate their cause. And so they never spent any money on themselves. They lived like Rakhmatov, if you ever read What Is to Be Done by Trenchevsky. They lived very austere lifestyles, and they never spoiled themselves with the money they stole from banks. So, just to reiterate, we've gone over Germany, Italy, Spain, and Greece, and the next one is France, which has been the big. We haven't covered France. Obviously, a lot of political activity's gone on in France recently and back then. And so the main far-left terrorist organization in France, during the 20th century was Action Directe, which operated from 1979 to 1987, so about 8 years. They were libertarian communist and autonomist. Their leader was Jean-Marc Roulien, and they collaborated with the German RAF. In 1985, they executed a joint operation at a military air base where they basically bombed this military air base. And if you think about it in modern day terms, we're in Colorado Springs, right? We have 3 different bases here. This is like us attacking NORAD or something. This is some high level shit. The fact that they were able, again, to get away with this. So like the 4 main far left terrorist organizations in the post-war era, the AD or Action Directe in France, they worked with other far left terrorist organizations. In this case, the German RAF, to bomb a local Air Force military base in France, and they got away scot-free. They were not prosecuted or anything. They were never found out. Decades later, they were arrested and admitted to committing this act. But it's kind of extraordinary. Like, you wouldn't think that today people would have the organizational or any other capacity to actually carry this out successfully without being at least caught, if not destroyed. So over the course of their tenure, over let's see here, 8 years, they carried out 50 attacks, which again, their modus operandi were very similar to the ones that we've gone over before. Robberies, assassinations, gunfights, bombings. They actually forged traveler's checks, which was their main way of gaining finances, because
I wish
with
that
all
was
these
a thing anymore, by the way.
I
Traveler's
know,
checks.
right? So
God,
easy.
It's such a beautiful, such an exploitable system, because it was basically, I don't come from this country, so you're going to access my foreign bank's system via this traveler's check. But there was no electronic verification, so it was just like, yeah, I promise my money's in there. I promise. I swear to God.
I promise
I
that
can afford to be on
$20,000.
vacation, and therefore this $20,000 is definitely in the bank. Beautiful. Why could I have not been a terrorist in 1983?
All right.
Sad. Sad.
So a lot of, we've talked about, we haven't really actually explicitly honed in on how these terrorist organizations finance themselves. It was mainly through kidnapping and extortion. They would hold someone until the government gave them $1 million, and then they'd trade it off for, the money.
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
These guys, yeah, for real. These guys
We just fund them.
forged.
Oh, yeet.
That's
CIA
some,
called out.
some historical materialism right there, baby. So these motherfuckers actually forged traveler's checks and got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars from them. Very easy. Marx actually was a big fan of not paying back his debt collectors. By the time he died, he owed people tens of thousands of marks or whatever the fuck they were called. The German marks.
He was in England.
Yeah, so pounds. Yeah.
Pounds, yeah.
But no, he owed German financiers a lot of money when he died, and so did his son. But they never found him because he's in fucking he's in England.
Good.
Squad
Fuck 'em.
goals.
Squad goals.
They made a single publication called Pour un projet communiste. And if you go to their Wikipedia page, you can see that in French in all its glory, because I can't fucking pronounce it properly, obviously. In 1987, the year of their dissolution, they experienced significant arrests, the AD, or the Action Directe in France, and they basically, about a dozen of their members got arrested in a sting operation, and that was the end of them. They accomplished even less than the other organizations that we've talked about. They did not undermine the hegemony of the state. They never required the state to crack down on 12,000 far-left militants like in Italy, like we talked about previously. They kind of just, they did what they could, and they failed, and they dissolved. Anyway, the sixth most prominent organization in the post-war era was Revolutionary Cells, or RZ in Germany. I don't have much information on these guys, but they were pretty prolific. They carried out 186 attacks between 1973 and 1993, so they were around for 20 years. But they're not nearly as infamous as the RAF, which was their German counterpart. They actually never worked together, from my research. They never collaborated on things. Apparently, the RAF was very critical of the Revolutionary Cells, and they were both operating in the same country during the same time period, but they never linked up or anything. N17, incidentally, was very critical of other far-left terrorist organizations in Greece by saying that they were incompetent and they weren't going after the right targets and they weren't utilizing the resources that could potentially become available to them if they extorted them properly.
Sorry, ideologically, where were the revolutionary cells?
They were anti-imperialist, anti-Zionist, and feminist. They were not explicitly Marxist, but they were definitely far left.
Left, okay.
Yeah, so, and that's kind of like the categorization that I'm utilizing for all these different groups, is that they were all far left, but they weren't explicitly Marxist,
Gotcha.
But most of these were Marxist. So, for example, the next one, the Communist Combatant Cells, or the CCC in Belgium, which only lasted for 2 years?
Oh.
Yeah, basically 2 years, all of 1983. All right, so 3 years. They were just straight up communists. Their leader was Pierre Carretti. They executed 19 attacks, which consisted of bombings, and mainly they focused on buildings, not people. They went after the headquarters of NATO, of U.S. Military operations, embassies, what have you. Especially like the Israeli embassy in Belgium, but they never really, went after people. They did have a few casualties, but far, far less than other organizations. Most of these other organizations that we've talked about have killed dozens, if not hundreds of people. These guys killed 2 or 3, They mainly went after buildings.
Just probably like if you're talking about like gaining the sympathy of wider workers, then killing individuals is probably less effective. I mean, I don't know.
Well,
it's tough to analyze.
It is.
We'll get to we're going to talk about the effectiveness of all this, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we'll go back to that.
Yeah.
Jumping ahead.
Gotta,
Eat.
Just yeeting ahead. Yeeting to the answers.
So the main targets of the CCC in Belgium, which was the only far-left terrorist organization that seriously operated in Belgium in the post-war era, were
3 years. That's wild.
NATO, the U.S., Belgian military bases, and police headquarters and stuff like that. So they would launch rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, at the military bases or the headquarters. They would just blow up the infrastructure of the organizations. They take out satellites and stuff. They went after the technological infrastructure more than anything else, but not the people themselves, which was interesting. I think what they had seen, because these guys didn't arise until 1983, so they had about 15 years of observing other far-left terrorist organizations in Europe, and they saw that targeting individuals and killing them was not working for these other far-left terrorist organizations. So I think their modus operandi changed based off of the historical precedent that other far-left organizations had set for them, which basically said that if you target people who have wives and children and the media can play on all that shit, even if they're terrible people, then you should go after non-people targets like bases and buildings and stuff. So,
sure.
and it didn't fucking work, Basically, the way they dissolved, the way they ended, and the reason that it only took 3 years to finish off this organization is because the Belgian military deployed over 1,000 people throughout the country, which, mind you, Belgium is like a fourth of the size of Colorado. It's
tiny,
very
yeah.
small
It's very
geographically.
small.
Yeah.
Been there.
1,000 people roaming around the
Been
streets,
there,
you know,
done
there's
that.
no
Done that.
chance. You're done. You're fucking done. Even if you're advanced as fuck, like M17, like you're done. These terrorists were at a burger joint in Belgium. It was like an Americanized like burger place where they made double cheeseburgers with extra bacon. Oh, the best stuff, you know.
Young Gorby.
And
Check out that SoundCloud.
So this burger joint, they arrested the leader and all the main cadre, and it was the end of it. They didn't decentralize their communication structures or anything, and they didn't have other constitutive selves that could carry on the struggle even if the main headquarters got arrested. It was just decapitated, and that's how decapitation works. By the way, if you're talking about counterterrorism studies, is if you want your organization to last across generations, and a lot of the failures of these organizations we've talked about have been the inability to have future generations carry on your struggle after you've been killed or arrested or die of old age. The main failure is the inability to show them how to do what you're doing and have them operate independently of you, which is why I think a lot of socialist organizations have branches today that aren't directly mainly affiliated with their headquarters, you know, and they kind of work autonomously.
I think that's sort of the lesson to be learned from anarchist groups. Like, obviously we're. I'm gonna heavy sigh before I say these things. As Marxist-Leninists, we are as far from anarchism as an ideology as possible, but in a situation in which you are not in power and not able to easily seize power, it is probably best not to have a highly centralized organization in these early stages. Like, have your leadership be as diffuse as possible.
Yeah, well said.
And that is ML as fuck because it's dialectical.
Yeah.
Dialectical.
Hit
You're
me
looking
with
at
those
the
dialectics.
You might even say McDialectical.
McDialectical.
Like MC.
Like we're going to meet at
MC,
McDonald's.
like
Like
McDonald's.
the...
McDialectical.
We're gonna clown
Fucking
around.
hate you guys.
with some
We're
dialect.
gonna dab on the cops by
It's
not
just
having a
that,
centralized leadership.
Yeah.
But because it makes sense. I mean, you need to have some sort of like a line to follow, unlike anarchist organizations. But you ought to have as like limited a like centralized leadership as possible in this sort of situation where you could be taken out at any point. You could be arrested for your activities. You could be, taken out.
So this thought just arose to me as you were saying that. And I think this is a really great distinction to make between anarchists and Marxists, especially when it comes to legality and illegality. If you're operating in an illegal environment, you're carrying out assassinations, bombings, kidnappings, bank robberies, whatever, you should probably have a decentralized structure so long as the state itself is very centralized and has, a monopoly of violence and is very hegemonic and stuff like that. Because, like, for example, the Bolsheviks or even during the Spanish Civil War, what happened? The state lost its monopoly on power, and in that way, they were allowed to operate in a centralized manner and be very transparent with what they were about to do. Like people knew that the insurrection in St. Petersburg was going to happen before it happened. People fucking knew that. Like Zinoviev and Kamenev, ratted them out about that.
Right.
And were executed later, justifiably. Shout out to Stalin real quick. Sorry.
No,
All the time.
All
Shout
the
out to
time.
Stalin.
You can't stall. Yeah.
Fuck those guys. They're for real.
Fuck those guys.
But anyway, the point I'm making is when you're operating in a state of legality and you're not doing anything explicitly, illegal or controversial or anything like that. Maybe controversial, but illegal is a different matter.
Sure.
If you're operating within the bounds of your society's constitutional republic or whatever the fuck you're operating in, you do not need to go underground. You do not need to become. You do not need to become decentralized. In fact, that would become a weakness in light of that.
Yeah.
But the second that the state becomes oppressive, or not just oppressive, but like authoritarian, like in Erdogan's Turkey right now, then a decentralized structure seems to be much more prudent in utilizing, the dynamics of the economic and political
If you're going
infrastructure
to
that you're.
engage in illegal activity, and by illegal I mean like literally as per the
Like, you're going to go to prison for decades if you
Right.
fuck up. Yeah.
You know, I mean, so following that march in March, where like our 6 members were charged, we adjusted our strategy, right? Like we decided we're not going to do this anymore. And it wasn't because it wasn't effective, because it was so effective. Like we went from having, and I'm about to link this to Facebook likes, which is not a very good measure of your reach. But we went from like 1,000 people who knew who we were to like 2,000 people in a matter of weeks.
The story about our arrests got shared by 16,000 or something.
So far.
30,000 people ended up reading that story.
Right. So
That's
it
insane.
was
That's a lot of
effective in that
The far left
that
in America.
our
Worldwide.
organization got its name out there. However, we were putting our own members at risk of prison time,
Yep.
of fines, of
Inability
of
to get good jobs in
right,
the future. Yeah.
like fucking them for the rest of their
Yeah,
lives.
for
And
real.
So we're like, okay, we're
Felons
not going to do
almost.
this anymore because it's a bad call.
Yeah.
So, and it's not because it was wrong, right? Like we weren't doing anything wrong, but it is a matter of here are the material conditions we are presented with. What are our priorities at this point?
Yeah.
And I think we've done a good job of sort of absorbing the attention that we got from that situation, and then adjusting our strategy going forward as a result of
And
it.
so that's a really good segue actually into what I think we should move on to, because we've been going on for a while here about these main organizations, which is the effectiveness of these organizations, you know, and the conditions that they were operating in. So real quick for those listening, there are 2 other organizations that we're not really going to go over. That's the Popular Forces of April 25, or FP25 in Portugal, and then the Irish People's Liberation Organization, or IPLO, in Ireland from 1986 to 1992. The reason that you don't see that many Marxist terrorist organizations in Europe today is because we tried this for 30 years. And just as Lenin foresaw 100 years ago after his older brother's execution by the Tsarist regime, it doesn't work. Terrorism does not work. If you want a fucking revolution to happen, you do not become a terrorist. If you want to execute revolutionary justice, whatever that means, then you go out and you assassinate Donald Trump or whoever the fuck you want, you know?
Sure.
But you do not do that if you want to foment insurrection and organize towards that over a long, long period of time. I'm talking your whole lifetime, you know? These people committed these acts in a matter of days or weeks or hours or minutes even, you know? And I'm not saying it's an easy way out. I still think these people, exhibited heroic tendencies and did a lot of good. You know, they actually killed people who deserved to be killed and stuff.
Right.
But today, if you want to build a revolutionary movement, you cannot just go out and start capping the state officials, because there's going to be thousands of people who are just so eager to take their place and do exactly what they were doing beforehand. And there's no way you can kill all of them, you know,
Right.
unless you seize state control and put them against the wall and fucking do
Right.
it properly.
Structurally, it's not going to change anything, because you're looking at it is a position, and perhaps the person who's there is objectively worse than the person who will replace them. But ultimately, you're not
Like
going
Mike
to
Pence. Yeah.
Right, you're not going to
Exactly.
you're not going to change anything in the long term. You're not going to materially affect the conditions of working class people in
Yeah.
whatever country you're in.
Yeah. You'd be better off starting a tenants union than killing, your local governor, honestly, because
Right.
you're gonna help more people that way.
I think if you were on the verge of revolution, like if the revolution was about to pop off, and you had just tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of supporters, and you were like, let me show you how vulnerable the state is, and then just whatever.
Kill people.
Guillotine Donald Trump.
Sure.
That would probably pop it off.
Spark a revolution.
But if you are talking about now in
Maybe.
the current conditions where
It might spark off World War III, just like Franz Ferdinand in World War One.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous game to
Dangerous,
play.
dangerous.
Very fucking dangerous.
Revolution's inherently dangerous.
It is, of course.
No matter how you go about it.
And of course, it doesn't guarantee that your revolution is going to be successful, even if you do
Or even happen in the first place.
kick it off, even if you are at that point where it's super close. But
That's why, to me, for me, the sparking of the revolution is something that happens spontaneously. Directing of the revolution is what we should be focusing on, which is, I think, why it's important to organize and educate, because we are not going to create a revolution.
Yeah.
But we can control the revolution once it happens, and I think that should be the main priority.
Well, the thing is, like, we're subject to the ebbs and flows of capitalism, and so, you know, revolutions usually occur out of the, you know, the contradictions or the failures of capitalism.
Discontent.
And the only time that it actually succeeds in, you know, creating a new world system or you know, socioeconomic establishment is through the organizational structures that are already in place that were put there by revolutionary socialists beforehand, yeah, and that have been perfected over years of struggle, you know.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have that, then you're going to end up with Germany in 1918, and you're not going to have shit. You're just going to talk all night. 500,000 people are going to be out on the streets and be like, "Well, what the fuck are we going to do?"
It's rough though, because they did have a structure there. But they
fucked up. They talked too much and didn't do enough. Bolsheviks did the opposite.
Not
the opposite, but they did.
The workers' councils were there. The soldiers' councils, the sailors' councils were all over Germany in 1918, and yet it still failed. And I think it is primarily because you had Friedrich Ebert as the Social Democrat was a stronger leader than Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, which is a bummer because they were both, like, you know, badass philosophers and they had great ideas, but they did not. They didn't put themselves out there. They did not. They were not
assertive.
Insistent.
Yeah.
Right. Like Ebert came out and was like, "I am now the leader of the revolution," even though he was fucking counter-revolutionary as hell.
All right. So anyway. There's this thing called the Mediterranean Anarchist Triangle, or the MAT, which is known by terrorist experts as the place where, over the last 11 years, 92% of all far-left terrorist attacks have occurred. And these three countries that, you know, compose this triangle are Greece, Italy, and Spain. 8% of the far-left terrorist attacks have occurred outside of this, in the UK, Czechoslovakia, Sweden, and one other country that I can't recall right now. But they've almost unanimously occurred in these three countries. Why, you might ask? So, since the advent of neoliberalism, there's this thing called the PIGS, PIIIGS, which is Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. That's the PIGS countries. And all of these countries have been completely fucking racked by the European supranational bullshit that the Troika has implemented through the IMF, the World Bank, and the EU. But anyway, these pig countries, you know, they've been very against the pigs in their countries because they've been instituting and you know, executing these neoliberal policies that have basically disenfranchised the working class through austerity measures, privatization, deregulation, which are the three main aspects of neoliberalism, which are, again, real quick for those of you who weren't paying attention, deregulation, austerity, and privatization. So in Spain, in the last 11 years, there were 112 attacks of far-left terrorist organizations. In Italy, there were 78. In Greece, there were 108. And all the other countries combined, there were only 26. So overall, there were 324 left-wing terrorist attacks in the EU over the 11-year period in question, with approximately 92% of all attacks occurring within the Mediterranean Anarchist Triangle, which again is, you know, Greece, Italy, and Spain. Basically, you know, the question arises inevitably, what the fuck is going on here? And basically, my answer to that is,
isn't that the name of one of Lenin's books?
the fuck is going on?
Yeah, you have the Lenin trilogy. What the fuck happened? What the fuck is going on? And what the fuck are we gonna do?
All right, so in Greece, Italy, and Spain, or the anarchist Mediterranean Triangle, basically in the 21st century, there have been almost 50 far-left terrorist organizations that have popped up and declined within the course of a year or two. Most of these organizations arise and disseminate very, very quickly. Why? I don't know. There's no allusion to why this happens in the Europol reports I read about or anything like that, but it does happen. So while there are very few far-left terrorist organizations today that are sustaining themselves, there are many more than we hear about in the news media and what have you.
So, you know, we've talked a lot about left-wing terrorism. What do we have to say about right-wing terrorism?
All right, so during the Cold War, there was a concerted effort to back far-right militias against far-left militias who might, you know, win the state against, you know, Western democratic capitalist sentiments in lieu or in favor of the Eastern European communist states. So basically, a series of Freedom of Information Act requests went through that stated that the far-right terrorist organizations of the Cold War era, especially of the 80s and 90s, were actually backed by the governments of those countries, especially in Czechoslovakia and West Germany. So, there were a lot of far-right activities going on at this time. And basically, the stay-behind operation, called Operation Paperclip, I believe, was primarily responsible for the funding and the arming of these right-wing militias who had underground bunkers and thousands of weapons and grenades and bombs and IEDs and all these RPGs, crazy shit, stuff that could blow up embassies and major industrial sectors. All of these things were funded by NATO, primarily under the auspices of the U.S. military-industrial complex. And so, if you're going to look at the possibility of left-wing militias and left-wing terrorist organizations being funded by the East or by communist Eastern Europe during this era, you also have to look at how the West funded far-right, neo-fascist, neo-Nazi ideologues under the auspices of this Operation Paperclip operation, which was a stay-behind operation, just in case, and the whole purpose of all of this was that, say Western Germany or Belgium or one of the Low Countries, or anything like that, Luxembourg, was overtaken by communist forces, they would have already in place a developed infrastructure of far-right militiamen who would be able to rise up against that far-left communist state, to overthrow it, kill the leaders, decapitate it, whatever, and basically institute a state that was amicable to the NATO-aligned countries.
But that's that's Europe, and there's also FARC in Colombia, or you've got, that was Colombia, right?
Yeah, FARC is in Colombia. Yeah.
FARC was in Colombia, yeah. And you also had the Contras in Nicaragua.
Yep. Sandinistas.
That was the Nicaragua. That was the left-wing organization in Nicaragua. But Costa Rica, El Salvador, all of these locations, Chile, we funded right-wing paramilitary or military governments, terrorists, who would then often seize state power in these places, because the amount of money that the CIA could dump into these places was way more than could be funded internally by left-wing organizations.
And something we didn't really talk about in our discussion of left-wing terrorist organizations in Europe, which I would encourage listeners to look into, is the support of these left-wing terrorist organizations by left-wing countries. So, for example, what did the terrorists in Portugal, what did they get from other countries? Basically, all they ever got was refugee status in Mozambique, which was, at the time, an African socialist country. The Mozambican government never really gave them armaments or anything of the sort. But if they fled there, yeah, exactly. If they fled there, you could stay here, and we're not going to extradite you to whatever bullshit show trial, literally, that the U.S. is going to perform for you to be executed or tortured or disappeared, through CIA black sites or what have you. So I think that's really important to understand, that the far right during this entire period was much more well-funded than the far left, and demonstrably so, through, like I said, Freedom of Information Act requests and just released documents from the intelligence communities the world over since this period ended and since the Cold War ended.
So the next segment we're going to discuss here is Seeing Red. We're going to pick the most obnoxious hot takes from the dark caverns of the internet, and we're going to read them out to our comrades in an attempt to evoke the purest form of rage. Are y'all ready?
Yes.
I'm ready.
Super
Okay.
ready, baby.
It's not hard. I'm always
So
just pure rage.
I took literally all of these from the Facebook page of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Oh my god!
Holy
She,
shit!
Fucking kill me.
She posted a campaign video where she made a bunch of really milquetoast sock-dim promises, and
And we'll totally follow through with all of them.
she won't because she can't, because bourgeois politics are garbage. But these were very like middle of the road, like loose, no definite promises made here. But because she calls herself a democratic socialist, it brings like all of the garbage out of the woodworks. So here we go. I'm going to begin with the first one. It is written in the format of a poem, so I'm going to attempt to read it.
This can only be good.
Oh, it can only be good. I'm gonna go ahead and read this in the form of the poem that it was written in.
Rest in peace.
I bought a bird feeder. I hung it on my back porch and filled it with seed. What a beauty of a bird feeder it was, as I filled it lovingly with seed. Within a week we had hundreds of birds, taking advantage of the continuous flow of free food and easily accessible food. But then the birds started building nests in the boards of the patio above the table and next to the barbecue. Then came the crap. It was everywhere, on the patio, tile, the chairs, the table, everywhere. Then some of the birds turned mean. They would dive bomb me and try to peck me, excuse me. I am totally fucking up the flow of this poem. I'm so sorry.
It's okay. Robert Frost would still be so proud of
I was
this.
so proud. They would dive bomb me and try to peck me even though I had fed them out of my own pocket. And other birds were boisterous and loud. They sat on the feeder and squawked and screamed at all hours of the day and night, and demanded that I fill it when it get low on food.
It's like an analogy for political discontents. How
Hang
deep.
on, it's gonna get so much better here.
It's so fucking deep. Birds are basically humans, you know.
Basically. And other birds were boisterous and loud. They sat on the feeder and squawked and screamed all hours of the day and night and demanded that I fill it when it get low on food. After a while, I couldn't even sit on my own back porch anymore. So I took down the bird feeder, and in 3 days the birds were gone. I cleaned up their mess and took down the many nests that they had built all over the patio. Soon the backyard was quiet like it used to be.
Sounds
Quiet,
authoritarian.
serene, and no one demanding rights to a free meal.
So
Now let's see. Our government gives out free food, subsidized housing, free medical care, and free education, and allows anyone born here to be an automatic citizen. Then the illegals come by in their tens of thousands. Suddenly our taxes went up to pay for free services. Small apartments are housing 5 families. You have to wait 6 hours to be seen by an emergency room doctor. Your child's 2nd grade class is behind other schools because over half the class doesn't speak English.
Oh God.
Cornflakes now come in a bilingual box.
my goddamn cornflakes.
Hang on.
Saying it? That's so good.
Save the cornflakes, damn it. Cornflakes now come in a bilingual box, y'all. Fucking fascism has come to America because cornflakes are in a bilingual box.
Oh, no.
I have to press 1 to hear my bank talk to me in English. And people waving flags other than, I'm going to give you air quotes, even though you can't see me, ours, unquote, are squawking and screaming in the streets, demanding more rights and free liberties. Just my opinion, but maybe it's time for the government to take down the bird feeder. If you agree, pass it on. If not, just continue cleaning up the crap.
Real quick.
Hang on.
It's not over.
Hang on. Liberal response to this poem. You need to go to Canada.
Fuck all of you. Laughing maniacals.
What do we even need to say? You need to go to Canada.
Oh my
The end.
god. Oh my
Okay,
fucking god.
so response to that poem.
I thought the entire time that poem, I thought the birds were a metaphor for the rich. Just
No.
like
I thought it was too. I thought it was a metaphor for the Democratic Party.
But
Honestly.
so what they're trying to say is that one person should have the ability to starve an entire
Exactly.
population? Is that what they like?
like
They're basically
colonialism.
like, hey, I have a lot of money and I'm voluntarily going to try to help these people, but if I do, they're going to destroy my way of living.
Fuck yeah, we
Yeah,
are.
This sounds like a argument against
baby.
charity more than socialism.
That's exactly, I think, because it's interesting.
Sounds like an argument against colonialism.
They begin with the idea that I put a bird feeder out there, right? Like that is the beginning is I bought a bird feeder, I hung it on my back porch and filled it with seed. So basically they're saying we should not provide comfort.
What I'm saying is that the bird should have
it
killed
up.
the owner
Stomp
and then put bird feed.
Seize
Put
that
yes,
bird
they
Expropriate
should have
that
put the
shit, baby.
seed in the bird feeder themselves and then all ate together.
Right. But I think it's interesting that immigrants and people in need are animals and that capitalists are...
All right. Well,
Anyway.
while the entire Western white civilization lives off of the backs of those animals who are stalking their bird feeders, serving them coffee, putting food on their shelves, and giving it to them at the register. Their metaphor for birds are those people, and for some reason they think that while they consume all of that, they are the provider.
So this is a comment on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez herself, a little rich girl. That grew up with a silver spoon in her mouth, wants to play now at being poor, trying to pass herself off as, and this is capitalized, one of the people. How long did she live in the Bronx? She calls herself a democratic socialist. Yeah, a sneaky way to say I'm a Democrat, because isn't the Democrats for the people?
For real.
Question mark, question mark, question mark. And a socialist, SMH, which means shake my head, y'all.
Yeah, I got
Thanks.
it. Thanks, Jeremy.
In parentheses, oh yeah, that's the fancy way for rich to say we are for the people and the struggle, everyone should have free stuff. I don't, what?
Something.
Anyway, but wait, where does that free stuff come from? Who pays for it? What happens when the money runs out?
The bird feeder.
Then nobody has anything. Oh wait, that's the communist belief. No one has anything, so no one can complain. And those in power, the Democrats, get rich and richer, telling you how they are with you. Are they?
This is a haiku all of a sudden.
Yeah, I know. 575, baby.
Are they? Other than year after year when they need your vote, what have they really done? I back that.
Yeah,
Honestly,
I'm
I
not
mean,
going to
fuck the
defend the Democratic
Democrats.
Party.
Turn it around on them, you know. What have they really done?
If only this was not enemy propaganda. What have they really done? What promise? What have you gotten for giving them your vote? How often do you see them in your neighborhood, in the area? Think about it before you give away your vote and make that person richer.
If we elect socialists, then the people in the Bronx will have nothing. But they already have so much, obviously.
In the Bronx?
In the Bronx.
Are you being
That's where
facetious?
she's.
That's
That's where she's running. That's where she won her
That's what they
primary.
reference in the comment.
That
It's like,
doesn't make
oh,
sense.
this rich girl wants to play being poor and pretend that.
She's not rich, though. I'm
But
gonna
then
defend her
the
on that
argument
front.
the
I'll
argument
defend her on that front.
the argument is that like
not rich.
socialism would steal everything from all the people, but the Bronx don't have anything to begin with. They
Yeah.
gain. It's the rich who lose.
It's so.
So if you were to socialize all of Manhattan, the Bronx would gain a shitload from the millionaires on the street.
I don't want to
Exactly.
And 55th Avenue.
I don't
Right,
want to spend
and
like
the
a
millionaires-
ton of time defending sockdems
Never.
because it's silly.
Oh, of course not.
However,
Fuck
the
the sockdems,
idea
yeah.
that you get a barely left of liberal politician running on extremely wishy-washy fucking barely beyond the current Overton window of U.S. politics, and this is the sort of response you receive.
Yeah.
It's wild to me. It's so wild that U.S. politics has been condensed to this like tiny little
Range of acceptability.
Here is
Yeah.
the far right.
Even among the left, this is the condensed form.
yes,
dude.
because
That's
here
so
is the
sad.
far right. Here is the center. And the center is to the right. Like, we need to shift the conversation to the left. Because if this is the idea of the far left in the United States, we are utterly fucked. So, that was rough. Literally all of those comments came from one comment section. That's the painful thing, is that, like, we're a far left organization, and like even the like milquetoast barely farther left than liberal politicians get that sort of response. We have such a long way to go.
It's true.
We have such an uphill struggle.
It's true.
So our next episode is going to be with the illustrious Brett O'Shea
Who dat?
from Rev Left Radio.
Brett Chan.
Who
Brett
dat
Chen.
be? Brett
He's
Chan?
going. Brett Chen. He's going.
Should we call him Zeke? What?
He is with Rev Left Radio. He's going to be talking about the Cultural Revolution under Mao on our next episode. Mao. And so if you have any questions for Brett or the rest of the panel on that particular subject, please ask us. Thanks so much to Gabe for coming on tonight to talk about terrorism on the left side of things. Thank you so much for everyone for listening. Some suggested reading will be in the show notes. Please don't forget to rate and review on your favorite podcast app. Like us on Facebook.com/ProlesPod and follow us on Twitter @ProlesPod. If you have any feedback or topic ideas, feel free to send us an email at prolesoftheroundtable@protonmail.com, and that includes questions for the next episode. Anyway, thank you so much, and have a good day, night, evening.
This is an invasion, an occupation, a mortal technique. The evil genius DJ Green Lantern. And you're now in a state of guerrilla warfare. It's been spread by the superpowers of the industry to the third world underground of the streets. This is for all those who have been labeled extremists, maniacs, terrorists. Shit. Welcome to the third world.
Yeah, invasion and rampant monetary inflation that brought us all to the footsteps of this nation. Peruvians, Haitians, Ecuadorians, Nicaraguans, Colombians, Salvadorians. They call us terrorists after they ruined our countries. Funding right-wing paramilitary monkeys. Torture the populace, then blame the communists. The lies are too obvious, propaganda monotonous. And that's not socialist mythology. This is urban warfare through the streets of your psychology. So I'm like the legs of a paraplegic, really, cause I'm still part of you, even if you can't feel me. You can never debate me. The M4's at your baby, like troops with gats in Iraq do daily. So you can marginalize the way you portray me, but don't get Hollywood and try to play me. We can shoot it out in the theater like troops in the 80s. New Jack City, classic crap era, Mac Millie. Shouting BET is not black owned on Rap City. You got a contract to kill me, motherfucker, that's fine, cause there's a contract to kill your family when I die. So when your car explodes, don't be surprised. Soldier, I'm like Marine Corps C4. Even blow the spot with the beat, rocking a 3-4. Canvas the flow, like the ghost of Michelangelo. This is the anthem, immortal technique and Green Lantern. Don't say shit, bitch. You don't want the check to become a chick. You know what I'm sick with. Lyrical tuberculosis, cocaine overdoses, blood coming out your noses. That's when death approaches. March to my death smiling, laugh if the end's violent. There's no escape from this political asylum. Revolutionaries don't fear execution, cause the death of my visible constitution is just the beginning of spiritual evolution. God will reincarnate me as revolution.
You can't take out a revolution. You can't kill an idea. Fuck is you stupid? You kill that man, he becomes immortal.
Ignore the triplets. This is a fully loaded 4-4 third world underground hardcore street hop locked and loaded motherfucker. You should know it. Blast the doors of the game open and open.